Perfect. Welcome all to the second Juris North roundtable about Kelsen. The idea came a few months ago together with Gonzalo Villarrosas, University of Kiel, and Jorge Luis Fabra Zamora from University of Toronto. We've known each other for many years and we've done things before for IVR together. So we decided with common interest to use the Juris North platform and to do something about Kelsen. Gonzalo, Jorge, before I go on with the introduction, do you want to say anything?
I want to thank everybody for being here. I know that with all the time difference, I'm making an effort in this difficult time in history to talk about Kelsen. That is something that interests all of us. So thank you all for being here.
Thank you, Jorge. Gracias, Jorge. Gonzalo?
I want to thank the whole people here, and especially Monika Zalewska for accepting our invitation.
Perfect. Thank you very much. Before we go on, Juris North, very briefly, I mean, I'm usually the face because we used to run these sessions face-to-face here in the UK. We are 9 universities, academics from 9 universities here in the UK, from Aberdeen to Surrey in the south of the country, including Manchester, Durham, Liverpool, and so on. We're in 8 different places. And this idea started 6 years ago with some of our colleagues in legal philosophy and political theory. Right now we have more than 2,000 people in our distribution list all around the world. So thank you very much for joining us today. The housekeeping, different from other discussion groups, the idea is we all interact. This should be an informal conversation. We have one expert. Today we will have Dr. Monika Zalewska. Once again, thank you for being here. And the idea then is to create a conversation. I was talking to Jorge and Gonzalo earlier this week. I had the opportunity to go to another event on Monday, and it was very restrictive, almost censored. We couldn't participate, we couldn't ask questions directly to the speakers. This is not Juris North. The idea, we are here willing to learn from each other. We have one expert, and then we have 3 working papers, and the idea is to create communication. We are all academics, we all have degrees. The idea is exactly to bring knowledge together and to discuss ideas together. And that's the idea behind Juris North. That's why we created that many years ago. So for the introverts, I'm conscious we have different people here. If you're shy, feel free to write your comment or question. At the bottom of the screen, you should have a chat box. Write a comment or question, and Jorge, Gonzalo, or myself will speak up. We'll, on your behalf, present the comment or question to Dr. Monika Zalewska. If not, if you're an extrovert, you want to simply fire your question to Dr. Monika Zalewska. Thank you for your patience, Dr. Zalewska. Simply open your mic and fire your question. One at a time. We'll use the chat box, to put the order, but one at a time. You simply can have an interaction with Dr. Zalewska directly. And same with the working papers, but that section Jorge will explain later. Again, this part for the ones that are joining us, it's being recorded. I'll let you know when we stop the recording. A few things before we continue. I wanted to invite you all in a few days, the Legal Theory Festival. I'll send an email using the Juris North distribution list. There is a festival for legal theory happening in Edinburgh in a few days. People like Shower and and many others are going to be there. So the details are online. You're all more than welcome because for the first time, we'll do this online. So, the details are there. And if you need anything, send a note here in the chat box and we'll share that with you. And lastly, 2 things. We are going to be using hashtags. We'll share the hashtags later using the chat box, mainly for social media, because I know people younger than me are into social media. So you may want to share this. We have the hashtags. I don't know, Jorge, if you want to share. If not, we'll share them later. And finally, legal theorists from all over the world, today from Poland, Russia, Mexico, Brazil, and so on. We wanted to dedicate with Jorge and Gonzalo these sessions to not 2, but 3 people today. My mentor, she passed away many years ago from Argentina, Dr. Maria Teresa Lopez from National University of La Plata. Dr. John Gardner from University of Oxford, he passed away not long ago. And in particular, a few days ago, we had the very sad news, Professor Eugenio Buligin from University of Buenos Aires, Argentina as well. I know we all know, some of us had the opportunity to work and to meet him a few times, mainly in IBR or anywhere in the world really. So this particular session, because he was a Kelsenian lover, as we are all, is dedicated in particular to Professor Eugenio Buligin. Without anything else, Gonzalo, you have the floor now. Thank you very much, you all, for joining us today. Gonzalo.
Dr. Monika Zalewska is a postdoc at the Faculty of Law and Administration of the University of Łódź in Poland, specializing in Hans Kelsen's pure theory of law. Her 4-month scholarship in Hans Kelsen Institute in Vienna and later cooperation resulted in her nomination for the position of Polish international correspondent of the Institute. Dr. Monika Zalewska is the author of 2 books and many articles regarding Hans Kelsen's pure theory of law, in which she has not only connected Hans Kelsen's theory with the theory of democracy, but also attempted to shed a new and modern light on his thought by interpreting it through theories based on concept coming from other domains, such as the theory of conceptual metaphors, fictionalism, or the theory of metaphysical relations like supervenience or grounding. With you and without further ado, I leave you with Dr. Monika Zalewska.
Thank you very much, Gonzalo, for this great introduction. I would like to thank organizers for inviting me here. I must say I've been following the update of Juris North for several years, and I always thought that it would be great one day to present something in this framework of Juris North, and here I am. So thank you very much for inviting me, and thank you for organizing this Kelsen Roundtable, which I think is amazing initiative. So now I would like to share my presentation. I hope you can see it.
Yeah, perfectly well. Yeah, perfectly well, thank you.
Perfect. The title of the presentation is Fictionalism in Hans Kelsen's General Theory of Norms. And I was provoked to explore this problem by the question, what happened to basic norm in general theory of norms? Probably, as you know, in his last book, Kelsen did substantial change concerning the nature of the basic norm. Before, it was a fiction, it had a hypothetical character, and in general theory of norms, Kelsen states that the basic norm is self-contradictory fiction. So this formulation, especially in the context of legal science, sounds very suspicious, because how the fiction and how something which is self-contradictory can tell us something about legal science, or even tell us something about validity of legal system. Hence, I started to explore this subject, and I came to the conclusion that there are 2 ways to handle this problem. We can come to the conclusion that Kelsen made a big mistake by assuming that this is a fiction, reading what he wrote in General Theory of Norms directly, or assume that perhaps Kelsen wasn't that irrational that he would sustain basic norm as a fiction and make it foundation of validity and legal science. Perhaps he wasn't irrational at all, but rather under influence of Hans Weininger fictionalism. And I thought that if I decide to interpret Kelsen in terms of fictionalism, there is a chance that perhaps then general theory of norms will be coherent again, and that maybe Kelsen didn't murder the basic norm. Maybe it was something else going on. So I explored Hans Weininger's fictionalism, and now I would like to briefly explain the most important points. He gives an account of fictionalism in his book, The Philosophy of As If. And he makes an observation that the science is full of some fictional concepts like uniform movement or ether or Kant's categories a priori. All of these concepts have in common that they do not exist in reality. However, they are useful by bringing something important to the knowledge. They move the science forward. That's why Weininger dubs the fictions he is exploring the vehicles of thoughts. The most interesting for him are proper fictions, which he believes disagree not only with reality, but also which are self-contradictory. So probably when you hear it, you know that it sounds like basic norm. The fiction in Weininger's study need to fulfill the criterion of utility. This is their justification, why we can introduce something fictional to the science. This is justified only if such fiction contributes significantly to the theory in which it is used. Then Weininger also introduced the prohibition of drawing too far consequences from the fiction, because the fiction serves only one purpose, to promote scientific inquiry, and that's it. So any ontological question of nature of this fictional concept, or use this fiction to any other purpose than it was designed for, it's prohibited. So in modern fictionalism in science, there is no more this division of proper fictions and hypotheses, and probably this prohibition of drawing too far-reaching consequences, it still exists, but it's not that strong as Weininger formulated it. Anyways, if we look at Weininger's study and the basic norm as the fiction, we can see that the basic norm is a proper fiction. It does not agree with reality because, well, it's artificial comparing to other legal norms which we have in the statute or in some precedent. It's just artificial concept. It is also self-contradictory. The basic norm is self-contradictory because it is a norm, and on the behalf of the definition of the norm as the meaning of an empowered act of will, the basic norm has to be result of this empowerment. And this empowerment must be in a higher norm, which means this norm, basic norm, is supposed to be basic because it somehow closes the system, stops this regress ad infinitum. On the other hand, on behalf of definition of the legal norm in Kelsen's general theory of norms, it cannot be basic. That's why it's self-contradictory. And the criterion of utility is fulfilled because it enables to understand the concept of validity in normative framework, and also it enables to grasp the normative aspect of law in legal science, in more scientific framework. There is also the prohibition. So from its fictional nature, one should not draw such consequences as, for instance, if the basic norm is fictional, then entire law over the validity of the norm is fictional, or then our cognition of law is fictional and then entire law is fictional. So this is exactly what Weininger meant by prohibiting such consequences. And the fact that fictional basic norm grants validity to the legal system does not mean that the validity of the entire legal system is fictional. Just we cannot infer it from fictionality of one component, the fictionality of entire system, especially in this framework of fictionalism. This is more or less which can be found out putting this Kelsen puzzles together, because he wrote an article on Weininger. He also mentions Weininger in General Theory of Norms. But then it made me think, does it mean that the basic norm is a standalone element of fictionalism? Or perhaps maybe it's a symptom of something larger. Maybe it's not the only fictional element in General Theory of Norms. So maybe it is the tip of the iceberg and we just see this tip, but then there is a huge iceberg below. This case, in this interpretation, which I would like to offer, so this is now the interpretation which I would like to propose. Kelsen might have paved the way for fictionalism in much broader scope. And now I would like to examine this problem. And I will do it in more broad framework, legal science framework. And also later, I will show the elements of General Theory of Norms, which I'm suspecting that are also the fictions. So not only basic norm, but also some other elements might have this fictional character. Before I do that, well, I would like to make a very brief introduction to fictionalism, and there are two types. The first one is ontological fictionalism. The ontological fictionalism concerns the problem of existence, is a third way between nominalism and realism. It also includes meta-ethical fictionalism, which I put aside today. The main strategies of fictionalism are two, and the best way to explain it is on some books, some stories we know, which are fictional. So if I say Robinson Crusoe lived on a desert island, someone could tell me, but this is false. There was no Robinson Crusoe. So yeah, okay, this is false, but then it's different false than the statement today is a Sunday. There is something, there is much more information and much more value in this statement Robinson Crusoe lived on desert island. So this fictionalism on ontological level also dealing with such problems. And there are two main strategies which are used to explain this phenomena. First one is prefixing. So it's stating that the fiction, stating that in the fiction X, statement Y is true. So according to the book of Daniel Defoe, Robinson Crusoe lived on desert island, and then everything seems to be fine. The other strategy, which is much more useful for this Kelsen's framework, is prefacing. It's also called as-if conduct, which I think bring us our thoughts to Weininger, who dubbed his philosophy as-if philosophy. This is the activity which resembles pretending that something takes place. So when we discuss the adventures of Robinson Crusoe and what he does there, we pretend he existed. And this ontological fictionalism has complicated relationship with Weininger's fictionalism, because it was somehow independent movement. It was some sort of reset done in 80s because Weininger wasn't very well, wasn't very regarded. he was, the Vienna Circle rather rejected him, and then he was an example of bad philosophy. Probably not, it wasn't that justified. But ontological fictionalism is not really that much related to Weininger. They consider themselves rather as close cousin, and they rather criticize Weininger, say that Weininger saw fictions everywhere. It's partially true, but there is another type of fictionalism. This is fictionalism in science. And this one stems from Weininger's account. There is one foundational article done by Arthur Fine, who rehabilitates Weininger and also indicates the directions in which this fictionalism in science, to which the Weininger's as if philosophy would be fundamental, could the direction in which this fictionalism in science could go further. This fictionalism in science focuses on methodological issues and addresses the question how fictions work and how can they be useful in science, because here is this suspicious phenomena. There is a science and suddenly there are fictions which exist in science and somehow they seem to be helpful. So the fictionalists in science try to explain how it is possible, because it seems like combining fire and ice. Hence, it's less focused on fictional strategy. The main goal of this movement is to understand the function of fictions, especially scientific models. Scientific models are in the center of this inquiry in science. And they try also to explain how these fictional models can contribute to science and how these models contribute to science. And they try to address the question, how is that possible? Now, let's see, Hans Kelsen and contemporary fictionalism. I believe that Kelsen's, the fictionalism can be used for both types of fictionalism. It can be paired with ontological fictionalism. This will explain the strategies which can be used for these particular categories which are fiction, and also this larger framework can be explained by fictionalism in science. And I would like to start from fictionalism, problem of fictionalism and legal science, and get back to this problem of the basic norm as the tip of the iceberg. So if basic norm is a symptom, it would be worthwhile to try to trace back how the origins of the basic norm, how it has happened that basic norm emerged. And as probably we all know it, the basic norm is the consequence of two separations made by Kelsen. The first one is between law and morality, and the second one is between is and ought. And Kelsen, as a normativist, being unable to justify the validity of the Constitution by natural law doctrine or facts, he introduced this normative category of the basic norm. Hence, the basic norm emerged as a consequence of two separations. And I believe both of them can be interpreted as fictional to some extent. Let's start with the separation of is and ought. Yeah, I use here the laboratory metaphor, that this ought sphere is actually this Kelsen's laboratory, and Kelsen acts like a scientist who is examining the sample in the laboratory and makes sure that this sample is pure, not contaminated by alien elements. Why is it a fiction? If we, as lawyers, make some steps backwards and now for a moment, think as an everyman, not a lawyer, as everyman who has only this provisional contact with law, probably he or she perceives law as blended with other social phenomena. He doesn't have this awareness that he sees law everywhere. This is blended in this social phenomena. And that was this initial state in which law was before positivists came. It was blended with everything else. And then the separation by Kelsen was made for the purpose of cognizing law. So taking this legal phenomena to this laboratory, haute laboratory, and examine it as normative. Because if we want to know the nature of law, see it as it is, we need to think as if the law was separated from fact. Because despite the law is blended in this society, it is distinct. It is distinct from other social facts because it is normative. So in order to cognize this normativity, we need to separate it from the other fact. But of course, and Kelsen also states that as soon as lawyers sees the legal system as distinct from the fact, then he can step back from this separation and start to reconstruct the links between is and ought and treat it as some sort of Wittgenstein's ladder. I think when Kelsen says that this separation of is and ought is for the purposes of legal science, but of course there can be a sociology of law, there can be psychology of law. This is exactly when we can interpret it as this step back from this fiction and get back to the society with law and examine it again a bit more blended. But then we see the boundaries, we see its normativity, we know what it is, so we gain some new knowledge. This separation is fictional because it's artificial. Law does not exist outside society. It doesn't make sense, I believe, outside society. I think it's a very strong connection in one with another. So such separation is needed to cognize the law, but it's fictional. And is only made for this one purpose of legal science, to cognize the law in its pure form, not contaminated by other social phenomena of not normative nature, and to understand the normative aspect of law. Hence, we act as if law was separated from facts, which is this strategy of prefacing. There might be some misunderstandings because fiction has this double meaning. One is the fiction is science, which I introduced, but then there is this more common way of thinking. If I say is and ought is fictional, then one might say, so legal positivists are right and Kelsen are wrong because this is all fictional. So of course, this is not this meaning. So now I would like to make it clear what I don't mean by that. It does not mean that the separation between is and ought is false. Law is distinct from social fact. It has normative nature. And that's why we need to examine this aspect in separation from other non-normative phenomena. This also does not mean that law is a fact, because it's not. The fiction of separation of is and not is introduced exactly because law is not a fact, but because it's blended with other social phenomena, which are facts. We need to make this separation. Because without such separation, it might be difficult to grasp the normative aspect of law. So it doesn't mean that legal positivists are right and now we just forget about Kelsen. It's different type of thinking about fictionality. Then there's second separation. If we cognize law as a normative phenomena, we still have many other normative phenomena, and we need to also distinguish one from another. And I believe here is a bit different way of thinking about fictionality. Here we can think of Kelsen's pure theory of law in terms of a model, and scientific model is considered as a fiction. Models represent reality in the same manner as a map of Vienna represents city of Vienna. So it contains some very important details which allow us to orientate, but they don't say anything about the beauty of Vienna or about the content of law. The pure theory is a representation of concrete legal system, which means the pure theory abstracts from the problem of the content of law. And concrete legal system, of course, contains several moral rules or general clauses. We could even agree with her that there must be some minimum of natural law content. But the aim of the model is to focus on one important aspect of the phenomenon, eliminating anything which is irrelevant for this aspect. So not for the law, but for this one aspect. And what Kelsen did, he was examining the form of law. He was trying to define law in most objective terms of legal science. That's why the content of law, which is not objective, it's always a part of some negotiations of the society. Not always, sometimes it's just a ruling of one person, but content is not the part of legal science because it cannot be grasped in objective terms. Hence, this scientific model abstracts from the content of law and from morality, which is the least objective component of this content of law, probably, or maybe Kelsen would say that. Hence, here we assume a fiction by purifying the law from alien elements such as morality, and thanks to such separation, this legal system can be defined in objective terms. Hence, we act as if law were radically separated from morality. Of course, here could be another misunderstanding that this fictional separation between law and morality means that law and morality are not separated. Well, in this aspect they are, in which we are talking about. They might be not in other. Morality could very strongly impact the law, even the validity, I think. But that's not the problem with the concept of law. The concept of law is not associated with morality, at least according to legal positivists, and I'm in this framework. So for this reason, this separation is needed. Not to confuse, again, legal phenomena with some other phenomena. And thanks to this separation, then we can work on some clear relations between law and morality. Now let's get back to basic norm. This general fictional framework leads to the notion of the basic norm. And the question concerning the validity forced Kelsen into this notion of the basic norm, which became the most visible indication of fictionalism. And the basic norm plays a role in two aspects. The first one is validity, which I discussed before, because it's also discussed by Kelsen. So I don't feel I need to go back there. I just can add that this is the strategy of prefacing, that such a lawyer acts as if there was basic norm and it was a foundation of the validity. And then we have legal science and cognition. And this aspect I would like to discuss because now I'm moving to discussing these particular elements of pure theory of law, which could also be in this fictional framework. And in this context of legal science, the basic norm is the category which enables the lawyers to regard certain system as normative and to regard a certain normative system as a legal one. Hence, such lawyer acts as if the basic norm existed. So again, we have here prefacing. And by doing this, the lawyer cognizes the legal system and acknowledges its existence. So then there is another level. This is the level of meta level to it. So the level of legal science in which we can understand how the lawyer think. And this level involves fictionalism in science. Now, I also think that imputation might be suspected of being such fiction. According to Kelsen, imputation is analogical to causality, and in neo-Kantian phase, that was obviously reference to Kantian category of causality. But then in 1940s, Kelsen departs from this paradigm in favor of Hume's account. And Hume is thought to have a fictionalist view on causality. So I think that if causality is interpreted in Hume's manner, this paves a way to interpret imputation in the same way. And how we could do it? What would be the possible interpretation? Kelsen considers imputation as normative necessity. And this necessity only exists if it's radically separated from facts. So it exists in odd sphere. In some concrete cases, in the is sphere, this necessity doesn't occur. John has stolen a car and he might be punished or not. There is no necessity in this sphere. Hence, the normative necessity is a fiction which involves the strategy again of prefacing that it exists. And this is another thing which I believe stems from this notion that this normative necessity could be also followed by the fiction of res judicata. So if there is a necessity between condition and the consequence, therefore in this normative sphere of thought, whatever is ruled must be true. And as such, this allows to understand this link between condition and the consequence in normative sphere, how this necessity works, on which framework. Finally, Stufenbau, that's the last category, which I identified as some sort of fiction. Well, the hierarchical structure of law, it describes the relationship between lower norms, organ issuing these norms, and empowerment. However, there is a vast critique of Stufenbau that, especially in some multicentric legal world, this very complex relationship, it's too simplified. It's maybe too outdated. Maybe it was when there were national state, it was relevant. I'm not going get deeper into this critique, but such critique exists. And I believe that if we perceive hierarchical structure of law described by the staircase metaphor as fiction and as a model of much more complex hierarchical relationships between norms, then probably this could be a good rejoinder to this critique of multicentric critique, that maybe it's too simplified. Well, that's what the models are for. They simplify. They abstract from anything too complicated to highlight one aspect. And in this case, this model allows us to understand the relationship between empowerment, legal norm, and legal organ in the hierarchy. And it will be more complex or less complex hierarchy. It's more about formal relation between norms than about the entire structure, whether it's a staircase or I don't know, the spider net. Hence, this simplification is done to make to understand the more complex more complex law. And here, I think this metaphor of the map really is useful, because here Stufenbau is some sort of a map which allows us to identify these connections. So now I would like to sum up. Kelsen introduced fictional to his theory through the concept of basic norm. It made me think that maybe it's a tip of the iceberg, and that perhaps there is more of fictionalism on the level of its methodology, and maybe on the level of certain landmark concepts of pure theory of law. And I think the outcomes are promising. There are some benefits because fictionalism explains what the separation of this and not means, how to understand separation between law and morals, or explains the absence of total accuracy in case of Stufenbau, justifies the presence of some categories. And I think we could also put it all into some general category that it sheds more light on what Kelsen did and why. And in the end, when read in this fictional framework, I think it brings some of the coherency to general theory of norms. However, there are, of course, the problems with fictionalism. First of all, this category of fiction might be very broad. So as some modern fictionalists say, Weininger saw fictions everywhere. So I think everyone should be cautious about that we can see these fictions everywhere. And there must be some boundaries set. So not every flaw of pure theory of law can just be justified by fictionalism. And it shouldn't be. But some of these alleged flaws can be justified by fictionalism. Then there is this fictionalism in science, and is very well described for empirical science. However, much less is said for fictions in social science, which means when I work on Kelsen's pure theory of law, I need to adjust the concepts which are about physics, about atom, about some very hardcore physics, which is difficult for me to comprehend as social scientist, into this social science framework. Obviously, there must be some differences. So this is a challenge to extract what's the most important about models, for example, because the examples of models are mostly atom or anything which is even tangible. And the last, but not least, I think it's the name of fictionalism. It's misleading. I think this we can diagnose this misleading name of fictionalism as this double meaning. What this discovery done by Weininger, which brought a new meaning to fictionalism, but also that there is this old meaning when fiction is something untrue, is something which contradicts the science. So it might be a problem for Kelsen, for someone who is new to Kelsen and reads that basic norm is a fiction. Also, the authors indicate that this is a big problem with fictionalism in the era of anti-vaxxers and people who are climate deniers, because they would love to hear that the science is full of fiction. But this problem concerns Kelsen, unfortunately, less. I think, but I think this misleading concept of fiction is a problem to comprehend and to grasp sometimes this real nature of fictionalism. Thank you very much. And that's what I wanted to present for today.
Thank you very much, Dr. Monika Zalewska. It's been a pleasure. Before I stop recording, I have to say one of the best presentations I've ever heard about Kelsen. I have to say that it reminds me of my mentor back home in Argentina 20-odd years ago. It's been a pleasure. Very, very interesting and thought-provoking. So I needed to say that before I stop recording. Thank you very much once again.
Thank you.